I remember the exact second it started because of the sound, not the sight. Metal grinding against wood like something alive tearing through bone. And before I even turned off the engine, I could smell it. Hot diesel, fresh splintered lumber, drywall dust hanging thick in the summer air like chalk. And I just sat there for a half breath, gripping the steering wheel while that noise kept going, steady, deliberate, like it had permission, like it belonged there. And when I stepped out of my truck, my boots hit gravel that wasn't there yesterday, and I looked up and saw an excavator arm swing straight through my living room wall like it was nothing. Like 20 years of my life didn't weigh more than plywood and nails. And standing right there in the middle of my front yard, heels planted like she owned the ground itself, was Rebecca Holloway, clipboard tucked against her chest, sunglasses catching the sun, talking loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Unpaid dues, multiple notices. Ignored, property deemed non-compliant. Like she was reading from some script that made this okay. And the thing is, everyone was watching. People I'd waved to for years, people who never once asked what I did for a living. Just standing there with their arms crossed like this was entertainment. Like I was the example, and dust drifted across my face, stuck to the sweat on my neck, and I tasted it, dry and bitter, while a piece of my porch railing cracked and dropped under the machine's track. And that's when I saw it, the old plaque my dad bolted there himself, half buried already, and something in my chest tightened, not loud, not explosive, just quiet and sharp. And Rebecca turned when she noticed me, gave me that smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and she said, "Mr. Cole, you're going to need to step back. This area is restricted." Like I was trespassing on my own property, like the ground under my boots didn't have my name on it, and I didn't say anything, not yet. I just took a slow breath and let my eyes move, not to her, but past her, to the details, the things people miss when they're too busy feeling powerful. The notice taped crooked to what was left of my mailbox, the county seal printed just a shade too dark, the date stamped 2 days ahead of today. The contractor's truck parked halfway on the curb with the company number peeling off the door, the operator glancing over like he already knew something fell off, and the camera above my door, still blinking red, still recording everything. And Rebecca kept talking, filling the silence like she needed it, listing violations I'd never been notified about, fees that didn't exist, deadlines that somehow passed while I was out of state. And I let every word hang in the air, because words have weight when you know how to use them later. And she took my silence as weakness. I could see it in the way she squared her shoulders, in the way she gestured to the machine like she was conducting it, like she had authority she could touch. And then she said it, louder this time. "If you interfere, I will have you removed." And a couple of neighbors nodded like that made sense, like this was normal. And I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because I'd seen this before, different place, different faces, same mistake, people confusing position with power, paper with law, noise with control. And I reached into my pocket, not fast, not dramatic, just steady, feeling the edge of my wallet against my fingers while another section of siding cracked behind her, and the smell of diesel got stronger, mixing with the heat rising off the asphalt. And for a second, everything slowed, the machine, the voices, even the dust, hanging in the air. And I thought about how far they'd already gone, how many lines they'd crossed without realizing it, and how none of them had any idea what was about to happen next. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just the quiet guy at the end of the street, and the moment I decided to speak, everything here was going to change. You ever notice how people sound the most confident right before everything falls apart? I said, finally breaking the silence, and Rebecca turned her head, just slightly, like she did not expect me to speak at all, like I was supposed to stay quiet and watch my own house come down piece by piece. And the machine kept moving behind her, slower now, like even the operator was starting to hesitate. And I stepped forward one pace, just one, enough for the gravel to crunch under my boots so she could hear it. And her smile tightened. "Sir, I already told you. You need to step back," she said, louder this time, projecting authority, projecting control. And I nodded like I understood, like I agreed. And I let my eyes drift again, not to her face, but to the edges of the scene. The contractor wiping his hands on his jeans, the clipboard in her grip with papers slightly out of order, the notice on my mailbox fluttering in the hot breeze. And I asked one simple question, calm, even, "Who authorized the demolition permit?" And she blinked, just once, like the question was beneath her, like it did not matter. The association did. We followed procedure, she said, quick, practiced, but not precise. And that was the crack, small but there. And I tilted my head, letting a second pass. Which office signed off on it? And now a couple of the neighbors. Shifted, just slightly, because questions change the air faster than shouting ever does, and Rebecca let out a short breath, impatient. County approval. It is all documented, she said, tapping the clipboard like that ended it, like paper alone made it real, and I stepped closer again, slow enough that no one felt threatened, but close enough to see the top page, to see the stamp, to see the date, and I could hear the machine behind her idle down, the engine dropping to a low rumble, and I pointed, not aggressively, just enough. That date is 2 days from now, I said, and for a second nothing moved, not the neighbors, not the contractor, not even Rebecca, and then she laughed, short and sharp. It is a clerical thing. It does not change anything, she said, but her voice lost a layer, just a thin one, and I felt it, the shift. The moment where control starts slipping but the person holding it refuses to admit it, and I nodded again, like I was following along, like I was learning from her, and I reached up and tapped the edge of my mailbox where the notice was still hanging. And this was delivered when? I asked, and she opened her mouth, then paused, just long enough for the silence to stretch, and I could see it now, not just in her, but in the whole scene. The way the contractor stopped pretending to check his phone, the way one of the neighbors lowered his arms, the way the operator leaned out of the cab just a little, listening, and Rebecca flipped a page on her clipboard, too fast, like she was trying to catch up to something that had already moved past her. Multiple notices were sent, she said, but now it sounded like a line, not a fact, and I let that sit there, heavy, unanswered, because I did not need to push. Not yet. They were already leaning forward, already watching, and I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and turned the screen toward her, not close, just enough for her to see the header, the timestamps, the empty inbox where those notices were supposed to be, and I said, quiet enough that she had to focus. Nothing was ever delivered. And this time she did not answer right away, and the engine behind her dropped another notch, almost silent now, and I could hear the wind moving through the broken frame of my house, whistling through spaces that used to be walls, and I took one more step, closing the distance just enough that the clipboard, the notice, the contractor, all of it lined up in one frame, one story, and I could feel every eye on me now, waiting, and I kept my voice level, steady, like I had all the time in the world. So either this is a mistake, I said, letting the word hang there, or something else, something heavier, something no one wanted to say out loud, and Rebecca straightened, forcing that smile back into place, forcing the authority back into her voice. There is no mistake, Mr. Cole, she said, but now it sounded thinner, stretched, and I just nodded one more time, slow, deliberate, and slipped my wallet free from my back pocket, not opening it yet, not showing anything, just holding it there where she could see it, where everyone could see it, and I said, almost like a warning, almost like a promise, then, we are going to do this the right way. The second my fingers flipped that wallet open, the air changed, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift like pressure dropping before a storm. And I watched her eyes, not her face, just her eyes, because that is where the truth shows up first, and they flicked down for half a second, just enough to register what she was looking at, the badge catching the sunlight, clean, unmistakable, and I did not raise my voice, I did not step closer, I just held it there between us and said, calm and flat, you need to shut that machine down right now. And behind her the operator did not wait for permission, the engine cut to idle, then silence, metal settling, dust still drifting through the air like nothing had happened, and for a moment no one spoke, not the neighbors, not the contractor, not even Rebecca, because authority does not need volume when it is real, and she tried to recover. I could see it, the way her shoulders pulled back, the way her grip tightened on that clipboard like it could anchor her. You cannot just walk in here and override a legal action, she said. But the edge was gone, replaced with something thinner, something uncertain, and I tilted my head slightly, still holding the badge steady. This is not legal, I said, and I let the words land slow, one at a time. This is unauthorized demolition on an active residential property, without valid notice, without a confirmed lien, and without a county-issued permit that matches today's date. And every word tightened the space around her. Every word gave the people watching something to hold on to, something clearer than her confident tone from a few minutes ago, and I reached out with my other hand and gently took the top page from her clipboard before she could stop me. Not aggressive, not forceful, just precise, and I turned it so she could see what I was looking at. The seal, the signature line, the date, and I tapped it once with my finger. "This does not clear jurisdiction," I said, and then I glanced past her to the contractor. "And you are operating without a verified authorization tied to the correct parcel number." And that got him. I saw it in the way he straightened, in the way his eyes moved from me to her and back again, calculating, reassessing, and the neighbors were no longer just watching. They were listening now, really listening, and Rebecca shook her head quickly, trying to pull control back into her voice. "We followed HOA enforcement procedures," she said, but now it sounded like a defense, not a command, and I nodded once, acknowledging it, then slipped the badge back just enough so it rested against my palm. Still visible, still present. "HOA procedures do not override state law," I said, and I could feel it then, the moment where everything tipped, not in a crash, but in a quiet, irreversible way, and I reached into my pocket again, pulled out my phone, and dialed, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving through steps I had done 100 times before, and when the line picked up I spoke clearly, giving my name, my identification, my location down to the street number, describing the situation in clean, precise terms: unauthorized structural demolition, potential documentation irregularities, request for county verification and immediate response. And I did not need to raise my voice because every person standing there could hear. Enough to understand that this was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was something else entirely. And when I ended the call, I looked back at Rebecca, who was no longer smiling, no longer speaking, just standing there with that clipboard that suddenly looked a lot lighter in her hands. And I said, softer now, but sharper, "From this point on, everything here is evidence." And I gestured slightly to the machine, to the paperwork, to the broken line where my wall used to be. "So nobody touches anything." And this time there was no argument, no immediate pushback, just a long, stretched silence where the weight of what she had done finally started to settle in, and the wind moved again through the open frame of my house, carrying dust across the yard, and I could see it on their faces, one by one. The realization, slow but steady, that this was not over, not even close, and that whatever came next was not going to be decided by a clipboard. The silence did not break all at once. It unraveled, slow and uneven, like a thread being pulled loose. And the first one to move was not Rebecca. It was the contractor, shifting his weight, glancing at the machine, then back at me like he was recalculating every decision he had made in the last hour, and I could see it in his face, that quiet question, "How deep does this go?" And I gave him nothing but a steady look in return, because answers were coming whether anyone asked for them or not. And Rebecca finally cleared her throat, a small sound that felt louder than it should have. "This is still a private community matter," she said. But now her voice had to work for the authority it used to carry naturally. And I shook my head once. Not dismissive, just certain. It stopped being private the moment you altered a structure. "Without lawful clearance," I said, and I watched her eyes again. That flicker, faster this time, because now she knew I was not guessing, and the neighbors leaned in closer without stepping forward, drawn in by something they did not fully understand yet, and I crouched slightly, reaching down to pick up a piece of broken siding near my feet, turning it over in my hand like it meant something, because it did, not just as debris, but as proof of timing, of sequence, of action taken before. Authorization, and I set it back down carefully, deliberately, like everything here mattered now, because it did, and I straightened and looked past Rebecca toward the street where, right on time, a county vehicle turned the corner, white paint catching the sun, emblem on the door, moving slow but direct, and I did not smile, I did not react, I just let it arrive, because this was not about surprise anymore. This was about confirmation, and the vehicle rolled to a stop at the curb, engine humming low, and two officials stepped out, one carrying a tablet, the other scanning the property with the kind of focus that does not miss details, and the energy shifted again, sharper this time, like the line between assumption and fact had just been drawn in front of everyone. And Rebecca turned toward them quickly, stepping forward like she could still take control of the narrative. "We have already handled this. Everything is documented," she said, but the words sounded rushed now, layered over something else, something closer to urgency. And one of the officials glanced at her, then at me, then at the structure behind us, and I met his eyes and gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just recognition, and he nodded back, understanding, and that was enough, and he walked past Rebecca without stopping, straight toward the exposed wall line, the torn edge where the machine had cut through, and he raised the tablet, checking records, cross-referencing, and the second official moved toward the notice on the mailbox, peeling it back slightly, examining the print, the seal, the alignment, and I watched Rebecca turn in place, just slightly, caught between them, like she was no longer the center of the scene she had created, and I spoke again, not loud, not forceful, just clear. "Parcel number is listed incorrectly on that document," I said, and the official by the mailbox paused, looking closer, then tapping his screen, and I could see it. The moment it lined up, the moment the mismatch clicked into place, and he glanced at his partner, a small look, but enough, and the contractor let out a breath he had probably been holding since the engine stopped, and one of the neighbors shifted again, whispering something under their breath, and Rebecca stepped forward, trying to regain ground. "There must be a clerical delay in the system," she said, but even she did not sound convinced anymore, and I shook my head slowly. "There is no delay," I said, and I let the words settle before finishing. "There is no approval." And this time it did not echo. It did not need to, because the truth does not need volume once it is visible. And the official with the tablet turned the screen slightly toward Rebecca, not enough for everyone to see, just enough for her, and whatever was on that screen hit her harder than anything I could have said, because her shoulders dropped, just a fraction, just enough to break the image she had been holding together all morning, and the wind moved again through the open frame of my house, quieter now, carrying dust across the yard like a reminder of what had already been done, and I stood there, still, steady, watching it all unfold, knowing that this was the point where control was no longer something she could claim, because now it belonged to the facts. The moment her shoulders dropped, even just a fraction, everything around her started to loosen, like the scene could finally breathe without her holding it tight, and I saw it ripple outward, the contractor stepping back half a pace, the neighbors no longer pretending this was routine, the officials moving with more certainty now, less observation, more action, and Rebecca tried to speak again. But this time the words came out slower, heavier. "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding," she said, and I did not answer right away. I just watched the official with the tablet scroll, tap, verify, each movement precise, methodical, and then he looked up, not at me, but at her, and said, calm and direct, "There is no demolition permit tied to this parcel." And that was it. No raised voice, no accusation, just a statement that settled over everything like weight, and I felt the shift deepen, not sharp anymore, but final, like a door closing somewhere behind us, and Rebecca shook her head quickly, almost instinctively. "That is not possible. We submitted everything," she said, but even she was starting to hear how it sounded, how it echoed without support, and I took a slow step toward the edge of what used to be my living room, looking at the exposed beams, the torn insulation, the sunlight cutting through where walls once stood, and I spoke without turning back. "Submission is not approval," I said, and the official near the mailbox nodded slightly, confirming it without needing to add anything. And the contractor finally spoke, his voice lower than before, careful. "We were given a go-ahead by the association," he said, and I turned just enough to meet his eyes, not confrontational, just steady. "Did you verify it with the county?" I asked, and he hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without words, and that hesitation traveled from him to the neighbors, from the neighbors back to Rebecca, and she straightened again, forcing something back into place. "That is not standard practice for HOA work," she said, but now it sounded like justification, not authority, and I nodded once, acknowledging the difference. "This is not HOA work anymore," I said, and I let my gaze move across the scene, the machine, the paperwork, the officials, the broken structure behind me. "This is a legal matter," and the words did not need emphasis. They carried themselves, and one of the neighbors stepped forward slightly, just enough to be heard. "So they were not supposed to tear it down," he said. Not to me, not to her, just out loud, like he needed to hear it confirmed, and the official with the tablet answered without looking up, not without valid authorization. And that was the moment the crowd shifted completely, no longer observers, now witnesses, and Rebecca looked around, just briefly, seeing it, feeling it, the loss of control not just in procedure, but in perception, and she turned back to me, her voice lower now, almost measured. "We were enforcing community standards," she said, and I met her gaze fully for the first time since this started, letting the silence stretch just enough before I answered. "Standards do not replace law," I said, and I could see it land, not just on her, but on everyone listening, because it drew a line they could all understand, and I reached down and picked up the notice from the mailbox, holding it up between us. "And this," I added, "does not even meet your own standards," and I tapped the misaligned seal, the incorrect parcel number, the future date, each flaw small on its own, but together impossible to ignore, and I handed it to the official beside me, who took it without hesitation, already treating it as part of the record, and the contractor exhaled again, longer this time, like he had been waiting for someone else to take responsibility for what was happening, and Rebecca's grip on the clipboard loosened, just slightly, just enough for the top page to shift out of alignment, and I watched it slide, watched the edge of it catch the light, and I realized something then, not about the paperwork, not about the machine, but about her, about how she had built all of this on assumption, on the belief that no one would challenge it, that no one would look closely enough to see the cracks, and I spoke again, quieter now, but sharper than before. "You did not think anyone would check," I said, and she did not answer, not this time, because there was nothing left to defend, only what was already done, and the wind moved through the open structure again, softer now, carrying less dust, like even the air was settling. And I stood there in the middle of it, steady, grounded, knowing that everything from this point forward was no longer about what she claimed, but about what could be proven, and that was a game she had already lost. What people do not realize is that once control slips, it does not come back the same way. It fractures, it spreads, and I could see that happening now in real time, not just in Rebecca, but in everything connected to her. The board members who were not here, but would be hearing about this within the hour, the emails that had been sent, the approvals that had been assumed, all of it starting to unravel without a single raised voice, and I took a slow breath, letting the dust settle around me, feeling the heat of the afternoon pressing against the back of my neck, and I stepped toward the county official with the tablet, not to take over, not to interrupt, but to add something that mattered, something they would understand. "You should also check the notice sequence," I said, and he glanced up, listening, and I continued. "There are no certified deliveries on record, no signed acknowledgments, nothing that confirms service was ever completed," and he nodded once, already moving through the system, verifying, cross-referencing, and I could see the result before he said anything, the slight tightening of his jaw, the pause before the next tap, and Rebecca shifted again, restless now, like standing still had become uncomfortable. "We sent multiple communications," she said, but even she did not specify how, did not anchor it in anything real, and I turned slightly toward her, not confrontational, just clear. "Sending is not the same as delivering," I said, and that distinction hung there, simple, undeniable, and one of the neighbors, an older man who had been quiet the entire time, spoke up from behind me. "I never saw any notice on his door," he said, and that opened something, small but significant, because now it was not just me, not just officials, it was the community itself starting to fill in the gaps, and another voice followed, softer but steady, "Me neither," and Rebecca's head turned quickly, scanning them, trying to pull them back into place, but it was too late for that, because once people start speaking, they do not go back to silence easily, and I reached down and brushed dust from my hands, more out of habit than need, grounding myself in the moment, and I spoke again, quieter now, but with more weight behind it. "This did not start today," I said, and I let my eyes move across the yard, the machine, the broken structure, the officials documenting everything. This started the moment process was ignored, and the contractor shifted again, stepping a little farther from the machine now, creating distance, not just physical, but professional, and he looked at Rebecca, then at me, and asked carefully, "What happens now?" And I met his gaze, steady. "Now everything gets reviewed," I said. "Every document, every approval, every communication." And I paused just long enough for the next part to land harder. "And anything that does not hold up becomes part of the record." And he nodded slowly, understanding what that meant, not just for this job, but for anyone tied to it. And Rebecca let out a breath that sounded more like frustration than confidence. "You are turning this into something it does not need to be," she said. But the words felt smaller now, like they did not carry the same reach, and I shook my head slightly. "No," I said, calm, controlled. "I am letting it be exactly what it is." And that was the difference, the line she could not step over, because she had built everything on what she thought it could be, not what it actually was. And the official by the mailbox finished documenting the notice, sliding it carefully into a folder, treating it not as a warning, but as evidence, and the other official turned slightly toward me. "We are going to need a full statement," he said, and I nodded once. Already expecting it, already prepared. "You will have it," I replied, and I glanced back at what remained of my house, the open frame catching the light, the edges clean where they should not be, and I felt that same tightness in my chest again. Not anger, not even frustration, just something steady, something that reminded me why this mattered beyond paperwork and process. And I looked back at Rebecca, who stood there now without the posture she started with, without the certainty that had filled her voice earlier. And I said one more thing, not loud, not sharp, just final. "This is not about authority," I said. "It is about accountability." And for the first time since this began, she did not try to respond. Because there was nothing left to stand on, nothing left to claim, only what had already been done, and what would come next because of it. By the time the officials started marking boundaries with small flags and quiet gestures, the entire yard felt different, like it had been redrawn without anyone announcing it. And I stood just outside the line they set, not because I had to, but because I understood what it meant, and that understanding is what separates control from chaos. And I watched as one of them photographed the exposed structure from multiple angles, slow, methodical, documenting not just what was broken, but how it was broken, where the cut started, where it stopped, what was left untouched, and every detail added weight, not noise. And Rebecca stood off to the side now, no longer directing anything, just watching, her clipboard lowered, her voice gone. And it struck me how quickly authority fades when it is not backed by anything real. And the contractor approached me again, more cautious this time, like he was choosing each word before it left his mouth. "If we shut everything down completely, do we leave the equipment here?" he asked, and I nodded once. "Nothing moves until they clear it," I said, glancing toward the officials. "Everything stays exactly where it is," and he followed my gaze, then nodded, stepping back without another question, and I could feel the shift in him too, the distance growing between his role and hers, separating himself from decisions he did not fully own. And one of the officials walked over, holding a printed form now, the kind that carries more weight than it looks like it should, and he spoke clearly, not loudly, but in a way that reached everyone standing there. "Work on this property is suspended pending full review." And that sentence settled over the scene like a line drawn in permanent ink, and I saw a few neighbors exchange looks, not dramatic, just quiet acknowledgement that what they had witnessed was not normal, not something that could be brushed aside with a follow-up email or a board meeting. And I stepped slightly to the side, giving the official space as he handed the document toward Rebecca. And for a second she did not take it, like touching it would make everything real in a way she could not undo. And then she reached out, slow, controlled, and took it, her fingers tightening around the edge, and I could see the tension there now. Not confidence, not authority, just pressure. And I turned away from her, not because I was done, but because my focus had shifted, and I walked toward what used to be my front porch, stepping carefully over scattered pieces, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with intention. And I crouched down near where the plaque had fallen earlier, brushing aside dust until the metal edge caught the light again, and I picked it up, running my thumb across the worn surface, feeling the grooves my father had left when he installed it years ago. And for a moment the noise, the people, the entire scene faded into the background, replaced by something quieter, something steadier, and I stood back up, holding it for a second before setting it carefully on the remaining ledge, not as decoration, but as a marker, something that stayed even when everything else had shifted, and behind me I could hear the officials continuing, names being taken, statements being noted, timelines being built in real time, and I turned back just enough to see Rebecca standing there with that paper still in her hand, not speaking, not directing, just present in a way she had not been before, and I stepped toward the official who had asked for my statement earlier, and I said, "I will walk you through everything from the beginning." And he nodded, ready, prepared, and as we moved a few feet away from the rest of the group, I could feel the scene settling into something structured, something that would hold up beyond today, beyond this yard, beyond her voice, and I began, not rushed, not emotional, just clear, laying out the timeline, the absence of notice, the incorrect documentation, the sequence of events that led to this moment, and every detail fit into place because it had been there all along, just waiting to be seen. And as I spoke, I glanced once more toward the machine, now silent, its arm frozen mid-position like it had been stopped in the middle of a mistake, and I realized that this was the point, where everything shifted from reaction to record, from assumption to proof, and once that happens, it does not go back, it only moves forward, one verified step at a time. By the time I finished laying out the timeline, it no longer felt like I was explaining anything, it felt like I was confirming what was already obvious, each detail locking into place like it had been waiting for someone to connect it, and the official nodded slowly as he took notes, not interrupting, not questioning, just letting the structure build, and when I paused, he looked up and said, "This aligns with what we are seeing," and that was enough, not validation, not approval, just confirmation that the facts were holding. And behind us I could hear more voices now, quieter but more frequent, neighbors speaking to each other in low tones, comparing what they remembered, what they had seen before, and it was not loud, but it was steady, like a current that had finally started moving, and I turned slightly and caught a piece of it, someone mentioning a fine they did not understand, someone else talking about a notice that never arrived, small things on their own, but together forming a pattern that had been invisible until now. And I watched Rebecca as she stood with that paper still in her hand, listening whether she wanted to or not. And for the first time she looked like she was hearing something new, not because it was new, but because it was no longer filtered through her position, and one of the officials approached her again, this time with a different tone, not confrontational, but procedural. "We are going to need records from the association," he said, "communications, approvals, internal decisions related to this action." And she nodded automatically, like she understood the request, but I could see the delay in it, the moment it took for her to process what that actually meant, and that delay mattered, because it showed where control ended and responsibility began, and the contractor moved farther back now, creating a clear line between himself and the center of the situation, speaking quietly into his phone, likely reporting up, likely making sure he was not the only one aware of how this had shifted. And I walked a few steps toward the edge of the yard, looking out at the street where more vehicles had slowed, not stopping, just passing by slower than normal, curiosity pulling their attention for a second before they moved on. And I realized then that this was no longer contained to a single moment. It was extending outward, becoming something that would be talked about, questioned, remembered, and I turned back and saw one of the neighbors step closer to the official with the tablet, holding out their phone, showing something on the screen, and the official leaned in, scanning it, nodding once, and I did not need to see it to understand what it was, more messages, more gaps, more pieces that did not fit the version Rebecca had been presenting, and I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle in a different way now, not as tension, but as clarity, and I walked back toward the center, stopping a few feet from Rebecca, not to confront her, not to press anything further, but just to be present in the same space where all of this had started, and she looked at me briefly, just a glance, but it held something different now, not defiance, not authority, just awareness, and I said, quietly, almost evenly, "This did not have to happen," and I did not say it as an accusation, just as a fact, because at every step there had been a point where this could have stopped, where someone could have checked, could have asked, could have waited, and she looked away first, not sharply, just slowly, like there was nowhere for that statement to go, and the official called out for a few more details, names, roles, timelines, and I stepped back again, giving space, letting the process move forward without interference, and I watched as everything continued to settle into order. The kind of order that does not rely on who speaks the loudest, but on what can be verified, and the machine remained still, silent against the afternoon light, no longer a tool of action, just an object within the scene, and the broken edge of my house stood open behind it, no longer changing, no longer being touched, and I realized that this was the point where the story shifted completely, not from chaos to control, but from assumption to record, and once something is recorded properly, it does not disappear. It does not get rewritten. It stays, and I stood there, steady, watching it all take shape, knowing that whatever came next would not be decided by her, or by me, but by the weight of everything that had already been set in motion. It was quieter now, not because people had left, but because everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, and what remained was process, steady and unavoidable, and I stood near the edge of the yard watching as the officials finalized their notes. Each step deliberate, each detail anchored, and the weight of it all no longer felt sharp. It felt settled, like something that had found its place whether anyone liked it or not. And Rebecca was no longer at the center of anything. She stood off to the side holding that document like it had more gravity than she expected. Her posture smaller, not physically, but in presence, and that difference was impossible to ignore. And one of the officials approached her again, this time with a tone that carried finality without force. "You will be contacted for full documentation review," he said, and she nodded, slower now, not out of agreement, but because there was nothing else to do, and I watched that moment carefully, because it was not dramatic, it was not loud, but it was the exact point where authority shifted, completely away from her and into something she could not control, and I turned my attention back to what remained of my house, stepping forward onto the concrete where the porch used to be, the surface still warm from the sun, the edges uneven where structure had been removed too soon, and I looked through the open frame toward the street, seeing it clearly now without walls in the way, and it felt different, not exposed, not broken, just changed, and I took a slow breath, letting it settle. And behind me, I could hear the final exchanges, the contractor confirming shutdown, the officials closing out their initial report, the neighbors beginning to step back into their routines, quieter than before, more aware, and I reached down and adjusted the plaque I had set earlier, straightening it slightly so it rested level against the remaining ledge, and I ran my hand across it once, not for sentiment, just to place it where it belonged, and I stood back up and turned just enough to see Rebecca one last time, still there, still holding that paper, but no longer directing anything, no longer shaping the scene, and I said nothing to her, because there was nothing left to say that had not already been made clear, and sometimes silence carries more weight than any final word, and the official who had been working with me stepped closer, holding a copy of the initial report, not handing it over yet, just holding it as he spoke. "Next steps will follow through the proper channels," he said, and I nodded once, understanding exactly what that meant, not as a possibility, but as a certainty, and I took the document when he offered it, feeling the slight weight of the paper, the texture of something that represented more than just words, and I glanced down at it briefly, not reading it, just acknowledging it. And then I looked back up at the scene one more time, the machine standing still, the yard marked and measured, the structure paused in the middle of what should never have started, and I felt something settle fully into place, not relief, not satisfaction, just clarity, and I spoke quietly, not to anyone in particular, just enough for it to exist in the space. "Power does not need to be loud," I said, and I let a small pause follow before finishing. "It just needs to be right." And no one responded, no one needed to, because everything around us already reflected it, and I turned then, stepping off the concrete and onto the gravel, the sound firm under my boots, steady, grounded, and I walked toward my truck without looking back again, because I did not need to. The outcome was no longer uncertain. It was already in motion, already written into every record, every statement, every detail that had been captured, and as I reached the door and opened it, the last thing I heard before getting in was the soft shuffle of paper behind me, the sound of documentation being gathered, finalized, and that was enough, because in the end, it was never about who said the most, it was about what could be proven, and that part was already done.